Shimmer, Academy. Shimmer. Yeah, Shimmer.
Hello, welcome to the first episode of OtherNetwork Conversations. My name is Federico Martelli and I am part of the OtherNetwork team. I'm an architect and designer, and today we are recording from Rotterdam in the Netherlands. OtherNetwork is a project that looks to emphasize the importance of independent art spaces worldwide, using a digital interface that visualizes collaborations happening between artists, curators, and cultural practitioners. This project aims to provide visibility and connect hundreds of project spaces that, in spite of operating in very different conditions, are exposed to common challenges. OtherNetwork consists both as an online platform that you can find at OtherNetwork.io and as a series of parallel projects that encourage collaboration and resilience. Among these, we are organizing a traveling exhibition, the second iteration of which will take place in Accra at the end of 2023, a series of local events and conversations in different cities, as well as commissioning text that will be published on our OtherNetwork platform. In order to emphasize the importance of creating networks, we have consistently used the idea of the relay in our projects, encouraging our collaborators to nominate people from their own network to participate. Each episode will be divided in two parts. In the first part, we invite an art space to discuss with us what it means to be independent. In the second part, we ask our guests to invite another project space or cultural practitioner that they are curious about, as we try to understand in more depth the dynamics of running art spaces in different contexts. In this episode, Colin Keays from OtherNetwork visits Shimmer in Rotterdam. In the second half of the conversation, Eloise and Jason chose to invite Ruth Buchanan, director of Artspace Aotearoa, New Zealand, as their guests.
We've just arrived at Shimmer in the south of Rotterdam and are joined by Eloise Sweetman and Jason Hendrik Hansma. We've just come up 2 flights of stairs and found ourselves in a space that's overlooking some industrial areas that make up part of the city's port. But Eloise and Jason, could you start by describing exactly where we're sitting right now? What am I looking at?
Yeah, we are sitting in our extremely small office space, which is also our storage space, but also our exhibition space. We are directly looking at some messy boxes, but right next to us, we're also sitting next to a Makaurau painting.
There are actually some very organized labeled boxes from what I see.
Yeah, it is very organized, actually. It just isn't as tidy as we would hope when we have guests coming. Good thing that Ruth cannot see it. And then we also have on the other side of this sort of plastic screen that we have to divide the office space is our exhibition, which we have on right now. Do you want to say something about it?
I just want to say that it's also very small. The whole space is like 38 square meters, nearly 40 square meters. So it's just, the whole thing is very tiny.
Yes.
Not just the office.
Yes, that's a good point.
And also, I just also want to say that we're on the second floor of a shared space with many other organizations.
Nice. Who do you share the building with?
Mainly with architects and urban planners. And artists. And this is like, I would suppose, like technically is a studio space. It was always intended to be a studio space by the people that we're renting it from. So this idea of a exhibition space situated within a studio is a core part of what we're doing here.
Okay, nice. So how often, if it's mainly your studio space, how often is it actually open for programming and exhibitions and everything?
Well, that idea so we approach it at our curating with a studio-like mentality. So the idea of actually using it as a studio for our own practices kind of went out the window, I think, after the very first show that we did. Actually with Ruth. Ruth was one of our first exhibiting artists, which is how we got in contact. And we realised that actually the studio aspect, I guess, of Shimmer is that whatever does not fit within the practice of our individual practices comes to Shimmer, because we usually have some crossing of interests and this sort of thing. So, yeah, you were quite disappointed though that you couldn't use it as a studio. Though it's still a sort of sore point.
I don't know if it's a sore point. Now I know I have another studio. Yeah. But it was, this idea of like what would sit in the center of a practice and what would sit on the periphery became quite inversed with Shimmer, which is really interesting to think about as like artist as curator and these sort of questions. But
yeah, well, it's also, I think, Jason, you're an artist by your background, right? And Eloise, you're a curator. So does that kind of balance out within this space? How do your two practices actually coexist?
Well, I think it works really well. Jason, I think, has a really great way of working with the artists, actually. He sees the practices in a way that I don't see them, simply because I do not have that material understanding like an artist does. I'm not trained as an artist, whereas Jason is. And we also have like a naturally kind of falling interest or expertise. Like Jason not only has this focus with the artistic practices and looking at them in a particular way, but also like you know how to look after the space. You can help install the works, like whereas I'm like the administrative the arts manager. Right? We would say it in that way.
I was work doing in-store for a different like arts organization. So I think all of that kind of folds into the practices.
Yeah.
And I also think then, I think about what might be missing from my own work and when it's presented, and sort of try to provide that to the artist. So update them with how people are viewing it or how their bodies are moving around the artworks and these sort of things. So the things I feel like I don't always get a report back, let's say, from the places that I'm showing in.
So you can kind of use the space to really experience that and sort of get that feedback almost.
Yeah. To test the works out with the artist in that sense. But
so Eloise, you just mentioned there's something about the administrative work. Is that actually like a large part of running a space like this? Like how much actually admin is there? And is it maybe less glamorous than sort of this, when I see these gorgeous exhibitions over in the corner there?
Yeah, I mean, we've just recently changed our approach to administration, because we for quite some time have felt like we were always trying to catch up with like budgeting and the next grant or making sure that the communication is up to date, but we had very little time to actually be with the artists, be with their work and do studio visits. And one very practical way of changing that was actually readjusting our to-do list. So instead of having administration at the top of the to-do list, we had the exhibition and the artist, which it took us like 5 years to realize that is of course, the whole point of Shimmer, like to get money is important to make sure that everybody can do their work and be in a good space. But the point is also to be with the artists and the artwork. So, yeah, it does sometimes feel that the administration is out of proportion for the size of our space, but it's necessary to some extent, sorry.
Yeah, and the administration, I think, provides easy and quick fixes to solutions, like when you're dealing with lots of more destabilizing artworks. So in the space of like artworks that are about undoing knowledge or rethinking the way in which we live our lives, the administration provides like an easy fix to like quickly solve an email. So it's also, I think, about how much you allow that administration to take part of that more sort of fluid, nebulous space that art is there to be making.
So I guess something that we're quite interested in really unraveling through this whole series and through OtherNetwork in general is sort of what it actually means to be an independent art space. And I think it's something that the definition is very dependent on the context. So I guess, would you describe yourselves as an independent art space, or how would you actually frame yourselves in that context and maybe in relation to other larger institutions and the whole cultural infrastructure of Rotterdam?
Well, I'm not sure what independent means, because everybody's dependent on somebody in some way. Is it independent from a market, or is it independent from a grant system, or is it independent from a single benefactor? I'm not really sure what that means. All these things are so, like an economy is so interrelated in that sense. We are dependent on the grant system of the Netherlands, along with many other exhibition spaces. I would say the majority of exhibition spaces in the Netherlands are grant funded.
But also we have a really good relationship with many of the artists that we work with. So often the artists will say donate their fee back into Shimmer. So we're also dependent on the relationship of the artist to also trust us, actually. So it's not just about the money, but it's also if the artist doesn't say yes to our invitation, then we're pointless. So we really appreciate that sort of relationship.
Yeah, maybe we're not independent, but we're enmeshed. It's maybe a nicer way of thinking of it.
But we also use this term integrated practice as a way of trying to understand our own practices in relation to Shimmer. And I would say that perhaps our practices are integrated also in our relationships beyond the funding or beyond the relationship with the artist. But we also learn a lot from our audiences. Like, most of the way that we curate is sort of intuitive. We have an idea of what we're doing, but it's all by feeling, which is not always necessarily a good thing, because you might have the wrong feeling. But through the conversations that we have with the artists and the audiences, we actually become to understand better what it is that we're doing. So that happened a lot in the pandemic, actually, that when we could only have one person in the exhibition space, we had this one person that started talking about the Stanley Brown works that we had in the space and looking at how these works related to his own life during the pandemic. And I hadn't even thought about, I'd been more focused on the Stanley Brown part, but there was we're actually, doing something else, and we hadn't realised that.
And maybe that wouldn't be immediately folded into a curatorial response, but that will definitely last over a period of time, and one might return to that in 5 years or return to that in 3 years and think about that person in relationship to the Brown work. So I think that's what Eloise means by integrated practice, is that they're constantly, the front end and the back end are constantly unfolding over each other and stretching out across time and these sort of ideas, right? And that's what we consider a studio, actually. Yeah.
Well, has that kind of also that intimacy with the audience, I think, especially having just one person in the space at the time, is quite significant. And has any of that continued through sort of, post-pandemic, even when you're allowed to do larger events and everything? Do you still feel there's that kind of intimate relationship with the audiences?
Yeah. I mean, we also sort of started Shimmer with the idea that we would try to make sure, sort of ambitious shows in an intimate setting. That's partly why the Shimmer is so small. We can only host a certain amount of people. And I've noticed that since the pandemic, there has been a greater commitment from the audience. Maybe we don't have as many people, but people want to stay longer, which means that we can have a much more in-depth conversation for the opening of the show that we have on now. We had a barbecue downstairs, and Jason was doing that and having conversations with the audience there. But then I was here, I think 4 hours straight, just having one-on-one conversations with the audience. And I feel like you can't do that necessarily if you have a bigger space or that you have so much to do. It's also you have to be also an extrovert, which I'm an ambivert. So I happen to turn that on at that day, but it doesn't always work. It's actually extremely exhausting.
Also, in terms of our location, we're not a place that has a lot of foot traffic. So when people come, they come with the intention to come here. And it's like your audience wouldn't know, we're not downtown or anything, we're not near the main train station, or you really have to schlep all the way out here, which means people are kind of locked in.
But I just wanted to go back to the independent part of the conversation. I also think we're slowly coming to realize that some people are dependent on us. Maybe not completely, but we are starting to be able to be in a position where we can offer people work experience, or we can pay them a small amount of money to do work for us or internships. And I think for when we first started, we didn't see why would people think of Shimmer in this way as an important part of their learning experience. But I think that has become more and more clear to us that we have to value that way more, and to take it seriously. So everything that we do, we are dependent on other people, but that we need to take care. Yeah. But yeah, it's reciprocal, but to different degrees, I think.
Mm-hmm. No, that's super interesting. I'm also curious, that there's obviously the community of people you have around the space, but Jason, you mentioned something about your location and where you actually are and the sort of lack of foot traffic. So what's your relationship to the sort of wider neighborhood in Rotterdam that you're in? And also, why are you here in the first place?
Well, we were here for very pragmatic reasons, that we were offered a space, this studio space that I mentioned earlier. One thing that we really fell in love with, I suppose, is this idea that there's a main road right in front of Shimmer, and that delineates the residential from the industrial space. So in terms of city zoning, we're in the industrial space. There was something really important for us in thinking about how an exhibition space wouldn't be necessarily in a residential space, but would be in an industrial space. And so our locality is mixed in with industry. And that for us is an important, this is also one of the most polluted areas in the Netherlands because of the port, which we're overlooking. And that's where the name Shimmer comes from. It comes from a Deborah Bird Rose talk called Shimmer When All You Love Is Being Trashed. So we feel yes, we're enmeshed with the community on the other side of the road, but we're also in a conversation around the idea of changing climate, of late capitalist ships coming in and out, or down the road is Boskalis, which is the biggest dredging. It's a dredging company. So all of these things play a part in the conversation.
And how does that relate then to the programming you do? Do you actually try and sort of connect back into the port, or sort of bring the port back in here or anything?
I think it happens without us intending it, actually. We, at one point, were calling ourselves the cultural loading zone, because the shows were always in flux. Up until this year, our shows would be year-long sort of scores of works coming in and out. And so that was in line with the port of this ever-changing landscape or industrial zone. Then we came to also realize that we're influenced by that, but also with the sunsets. The sunsets are incredible here at particular times of the year, but that's because of the pollution.
So the actual kind of orange haze in the sky is not this sort of romantic glow from the sun that we think it is.
I mean, it's still very beautiful, and so this is also something that we are always thinking about, how can we be in love with something that's so terrible. And it's also that we often have flowers in the exhibition, and what is it to have these cut flowers in the space in the time of an ecological crisis, but also Jason was in a conversation with a poet who was talking about what is more radical than writing poetry about flowers during in an ecological crisis.
And to connect to the thousands or tens of thousands of people in history that have also written about lilies, for example. So I don't know, trying to hold all of those contradictions together is what we find interesting about the locality, and is probably one of the reasons why we haven't left this space, is that it's very generative. It's also maybe about questioning the image that the city has in relationship to the port and its successes, and its, so I think that thinking through the way that culture destabilizes those images is important.
Yeah. I mean, also when we were realizing that we were so influenced by the port and having this continuous, unending exhibition, that we were also becoming Instagram in the sense of the infinite scroll. So it's not this romantic idea of bringing different artworks into dialogue with each other, but it's also a kind of gorging and we're coming to realize that like taking rest and stopping and making separation is more and more important. So there's also a contradiction. Sorry,
No, I think that's a really nice point to sort of conclude this part of the conversation.
And cut.
We've just been speaking to Eloise and Jason from Shimmer, who talked about their sort of intuitive modes of curation and the relationship between the space and the wider neighbourhood. We're now joined online by Ruth Buchanan, who is herself an artist working across exhibition making, writing, design, publishing, and teaching. Welcome, Ruth. And Jason and Eloise, you invited Ruth for a particular reason. It would be great if you could explain why you wanted Ruth to be your guest today.
Yeah, sure. Well, we've always admired Ruth ever since we moved to the Netherlands, actually. And we've been following Ruth's practice as an artist, really since, I think, 2012. And we've been in contact with Ruth through exhibitions and different projects over the years. So then when we learnt that Ruth was leaving Berlin and moving to take this new position as director of Artspace Aotearoa, we were really excited to learn more, because we really think that artists that are curators and directors are usually the most exciting. And also this space seems very interesting because it's been established for such a long time and it has such a focus on the artist, and we just wanted to learn more and to learn also about how it's governed. We have lots of questions.
Also, I think when you're not like quote unquote from Europe in that sense, it's always very interesting when people like return. And like, why have they returned? And these are really interesting questions for us. So like we want to learn more.
So Ruth, maybe you could actually tell us a little bit about the art space, just a small summary of sort of how you actually got involved and why you maybe moved from Berlin back over there, and how you got involved with running an art space sort of as part of your practice.
Kia ora koutou, ko taranaki tuku maunga, ko te atiawa me taranaki tuku iwi. Ko kaitohu o Artspace Aotearoa nei, ko Ruth Buchanan aho. So thank you for the introduction, all of you. Yes, I'm Ruth Buchanan and I'm kaitohu director at Artspace Aotearoa and an artist. Hard to do a small summary with that question, Colin. I feel like how long is a piece of string? So maybe I can say first a little bit about where I'm working and then a little bit about me. So Artspace Aotearoa was founded in 1987 and it was at that time just called Artspace. We added the Aotearoa in 2020. So Aotearoa is the Indigenous name for New Zealand, which is where we are. Founded in 1987 by artists and arts workers, so curators, administrators, writers and critics, and largely, significantly under encouragement from the Auckland City Council, because at the time, the only sort of contemporary art space were either the dealer galleries or Auckland Art Gallery, which is a large municipally funded collecting institution that's been running, since the turn of the 20th century. And they wanted to have something that was a little bit lighter on its feet with more capacity to speak to the contemporary. And I think particularly wanting to be a bridge between international and national conversations. So the founding director was an artist, a woman called Mary Louise Brown, and I'm the first artist director since her in 1987.
Oh, wow.
So in between, it's been led by people who call themselves curators, and sort of that has been the thread. And we were located downtown, actually also at the port when the space was founded, but moved uptown to Karangahape Road, which is really in the middle of Tāmaki Makaurau Auckland on a ridge. And we're housed in the former, purpose-built purpose-built as a post office, now no longer a post office. So we were upstairs when the post office was running downstairs. And in 2020, we moved from upstairs to the ground floor level, but still within that former post office space. And I really love that that's the whakapapa, the genealogy of the space, because I guess it's a bit like the port. And in terms of thinking contemporary, like to me, what a post office does and what contemporary art does is pretty similar. Like putting a lot of friction and contradictory material together. You know, if we're thinking about what Eloise was talking about earlier, sort of what is it to show cut flowers and write a poem but be located to an extractivist infrastructure, in the same way as what is it to be in a space where the administration of life, you know, your work and income benefits, your letters from your dole office, the letters from a lawyer, but also the love letters, stories shared between generations all sit within the same space. Oddly, previous directors haven't talked about that at all. So I've been like, what? Because what we do is we sift through material and then we send out messages. That's what contemporary art is for. So that's one of the reasons why I'm there, because of the whakapapa, the genealogy of the space. Yeah, as you sort of mentioned in the intro to me, I am an artist and I largely work in the space of exhibition making. And a lot of my recent work has been working with collecting institutions to, I think, essentially do change projects, and started to realise, like, it's real annoying if you come with ideas and then don't get to implement. Like, so doing a lot of that back-end work that Jason and Eloise were talking about, sort of what is it for an artist? What is it for an artist? How are we in these spaces? And realised for me, I needed to put my money where my mouth was and test out some of my thinking and sort of impulses in a longer term space. So I like to think that I'm practicing sort of homeopathy, like as an artist, sort of shooting impulses into that broader texture or ecosystem of Aotearoa and maybe the region. I'm not sure. Long answer, sorry.
No, it was a full answer. It's a great answer. So you started the position last year, right? This was what I was understanding?
November.
Yeah. So it's really new. So how is it? How is the adjustment? Have you been able to already get a sense, maybe it's too soon, of putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak, or maybe that's too soon to ask?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very complicated coming into a living thing.
Yeah.
You know, I'm being born backwards or something into an organisation because, you know, it's a building, an organisation, a space is alive and it's full of its strengths and its ailments. And when you're in this space as a foreign agent, as you are when you sort of start a job, lots of what I've been doing is that sorting room work, you know, as in the post office. So what is it? What are the processes? I also had to do a restructure. I also had to hire a whole new team. I had to do significant improvements on the building. I've had to do a lot of things that I didn't know I would have to do.
Yeah.
But I feel confident to say that in this short period of time, we've had so much positive response from our artists that we're working with, which for me is everything. So we've been very, very conscientious about how we engage, how we communicate, how we support with our artists. Just clarity, you know, like that there's a contract, that they're aware of what's expected, that they understand what they'll be paid for and what they won't be paid for, when they'll be paid. providing sort of pastoral care around the arrival of the exhibition into the world, so managing blessings and suppers for the artists before the exhibition goes public, so being very careful about that transition space. And I feel very proud to talk about how meaningful those tiny little things have been, but from the artist's perspective, knowing what's important and knowing like what helps you feel good as an artist and what allows you to also be comfortable with the ambivalence of being a person in the public sphere, when to rest, when to be active, when to expect that from an artist. It has been really gratifying. Like these many tiny little things can make a large difference. And a lot of what we've had to do is your reputation management, getting people back into the space. Like it is particular because it's not it's different than Shimmer, because it has this huge weight around it. And we certainly wouldn't consider ourselves independent, but we would consider ourselves interdependent. Yeah. And that is what I would encourage all art spaces to understand themselves as, of whatever scale. Small artists run through to large collecting organisations that, like any kind of ecosystem, any kind of, like if you use a forest as your analogy, you need all those different textural elements, different scales, different paces, different sort of levels of presence. So we talk about ourselves as interdependent.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, I've recently heard of some curators starting to call themselves interdependent curators. So it's really interesting to also hear you also saying. I would say that is more like how we were approaching the idea of integrated practice, perhaps.
Yeah, and I mean, I would also extend that to the artist as well, right? Like,
totally.
Yeah.
I mean, you may be employed or you may not be employed full-time or by someone or not by anybody, or sort of diaphanously through funding from Mondigan or whatever, but we are interdependent, as you've described, I wouldn't use the word dependent just by itself, because I think it is important to draw in that reciprocalness that you described earlier, and I guess the somatic nature of being an arts organisation, that we're alive and moving and responding, that it's a somatic work that we're actually doing.
Maybe I can ask something. I mean, looking at your website and the way that the space actually describes itself, I was really interested in the way you describe yourself, the intergenerational kaupapa. If you could maybe expand a bit on that. This, I mean, I guess both the use of the sort of Maori language within the way you actually describe the space, but also this idea of thinking in an intergenerational perspective with your audiences.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, like just back to the first question, which is why return to Aotearoa after being in Berlin, and one of the significant reasons for me is because of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, which is our founding document, which means that the organisation of this country is predicated on partnership. So it's always about being in relation through time and through space. And for me, that as a backdrop or an integral, embedded essence of where we are makes it a really interesting space to work, because suddenly everything is a partnership. Our relationship with our funder is no longer a power dynamic, it's a partnership. Our relationship with artists, it's all about partnership. In the same way as, so the intergenerational, so kaupapa just means like method, like approach where the essence of the way you work is housed. That's a kaupapa. And when we talk about an intergenerational kaupapa, it's just really wanting to inflect that importance of the ecosystem, that actually it doesn't make sense to be siloing things from each other. Sometimes there has been pressure on Artspace Aotearoa to focus really exclusively on emerging new / like sexy hot practitioners, and I'm not interested. Like, I'm interested in that too, but I'm interested in the whole. So using those words is something that comes from me now as kaitohu director, that I want to describe that's how we work. Sort of background noise from my perspective as well is a really big interest in how art history works. So to me, art history largely happens through exhibition making. Like, those two things are really, really interconnected. Like, through exhibitions, we make much of the material that allows art history to happen. So I'm sort of not interested in like, oh, we're going to fix things or we're going to fill in holes, but it's really about producing those complex conversations through our program, which to me means it must be intergenerational. It must be focused on emancipation, and it must be bringing in Aotearoa with bigger other outside impulses too, not to silo, but to be whole.
It's also, to bring up the idea of intergenerational, I'm also thinking about artists that are no longer with us, so artists that have passed away, or, the honor that it is to work with their work, and how, we had that a few times, how, fragile and sensitive that space is in contemporary conversations. And just thinking about, you brought up ancestry before, and this idea of like collaborating across the spectrum of also those that are not with us, and not siloing, right? That's also this kind of like making of art history, is not siloing it as a kind of, as a space of what once was, but that our interdependency is also based on those that came before us, for good and for bad in that sense.
Yeah, no, also like not siloing art history, exhibition making from the world. We are in and of the world. It's not that we do things about the world, we're part of it. Estates as a concept is a personal interest of mine, and that is affecting the programming quite a lot in Artspace. We've worked with 2 estates this year already, and that's a precedent-setting opportunity. It's also really important for younger artists to understand, the spiral time, I guess, that we're always talking forward and back at the same time. And for me, it's really exciting to work with estates who understand that their job is to promote and platform the artist in the spirit of the artist, and not to harden, protect or narrow, because there are estates where it is about hardening, protecting and narrowing. And we've just completed just opened a show working with the estate of Rosemary Mayer, and that's led by family members, which is sometimes good, sometimes not good. In this case, it was amazing. And, they're just really, really risky in that space. And it's super exciting. And they're super aware that it's fine to do something, see how it goes. And maybe they'll be like, actually, no, we don't do that anymore. But for now, rather than that sort of paralysis of, we won't do anything in case it's a bit wrong. Say, no, like, be alive, celebrate. So, that's an interest for me.
Maybe that's also that space between what a partnership is, right? Because I was in a talk recently and somebody brought up the idea about the difference between partnership and allyship. And they were talking about allyship as being conditional, like, you know, the allies, when they needed each other, then they used each other in order to like gain something. But a partnership is way more enmeshed in that sense. It's a lot deeper beyond a utilitarian kind of need for you know, what one wants over the other party or something. But that idea also that an artist, once they've left, you know, the physical world, that their work is still in partnership, I find that really an exciting possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think like haven't thought about the difference between partnership and allyship. Like in the context here, I guess allyship would be the word that's used in, for want of a better word, like woke conversations, but partnership is about how this place is organised. And what's interesting for me with partnership is that it does hold both the transactional and the transformational. And of course, you're always trying to set up process and policy within that transactional zone that enable the transformative. But as we know from, you know, partnerships in the personal space, that's like your lover, your child, your teacher, all of those things are always about that dance that we wish for the transformational, but there is the transactional, which is what you've described, Eloise, that that's the admin.
Yes.
So how to do that, how to do the balance, you know, how to ensure that you're doing enough of both. Like the policy and the processes, those transactional things have to be set up. Like we talk about, like, our goal is to be self-germinating. So we're a team of 3.5. And if we'd all fall down tomorrow, that all of our processes function so well, we don't need to be there, so that the transformative impulse could continue. Like, that's our dream, that it's just this, like, just self-germinates, just the stuff happens.
Oh, yeah, that's something that I think we should consider for Shimmer. I think that's all. It is interesting that you also mention, of course, the difference between Shimmer and your space, that we are the founders, and it is a question of, like, how and when we decide to finish with Shimmer, how will it continue? And I really like this idea of self-germination. Actually, maybe we're about to go into thinking about our future plans and what we want for, So I feel like we have a good starting point, actually, with this idea.
Can we borrow that?
Yeah, can we borrow this from you? Or talk
I just
more?
think everyone, like, we should all, that's what it should all be.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I'm a huge fan of templates. It's like, get a template. No, nothing bespoke.
Yeah, that's very true.
Just, like, do it.
I like that idea.
Making all the things flow so that you can have time to visit the artist, speak with the artist, be with the work.
Definitely.
Talk to help, like, encourage an audience member to come back, encourage them to feel confident in being with the work, you know. So you need all of those things to just...
I like that. I hadn't thought of the template as being sort of a space of freedom, actually. I had the idea. I really are. I feel like I've learnt two very important things today.
But the template's nice because you can also transgress it, right? I think that's also exciting.
Absolutely. Like, anything is only... I mean, we can't own anything, and then there's always the exception. Mm-hmm. That's, like, always has to be there, but that you don't have to think about. It's like how your body goes to the toilet. It's just so amazing that we can do that, and I just want to be able to do basic functional stuff. As an organisation.
That's true.
It's just like that like, in terms of that organism, so all the organs in commune with each other.
I think this idea of the template's also interesting in sort of, learning from one another and seeing what precedents are there. And as we mentioned, this interdependence and seeing yourselves as sort of part of a wider ecosystem, and even this conversation sort of to learn from each other now. But with that in mind, this idea of interdependence and sort of learning from these templates of other spaces and institutions, I have a last question. I'm wondering if sort of in a dream world, are there any sort of project spaces anywhere in the world, whether they're active or historic, that any of you would be interested in collaborating with or working with in some way or another, or at least learning from? Do you have any, Ruth, that really inspire you or speak to you in a way?
I think when Anthony Huberman was at the Artists Institute in New York, that was really inspiring to me, definitely in terms of how to structure a program and making an architecture for a program, which is kind of how I organised my practice. And then I was really excited by how that thinking happened on an institutional organisational level. And I'm not really sure where that place is at now, but when he was there, that was great. And then Hoya is an artist-run space in Te Rairawhiti, which is east coast of Aotearoa, led by Melanie Tangere Baldwin. And the way that they work with and in community, but really from the expertise as artists, is really beautiful and very inspiring. And the exhibition design and the way they inhabit their space, it is really exciting because it's super, super loose but full of modi. So modi is like energy. But for me, it's inspiring because, definitely here there's a lot of I don't want to say anti-intellectual, but a sort of oh no, yeah, art's not part of the world, and art's only useful if it's actually a community centre, or art's only useful if it's actually a library. And to me, these things in our world, which is our tool is the imagination, which is always political, which is always about working towards the whole, that finding spaces who front and centre that special expertise but ground it in the place is really rare, and Hoya do that in an amazing way without turning away from, we're artists and we do art shows, that's what they do, and a lot of co-learning, which is really awesome.
No, great examples.
I have my space that I would like to work with historically, which would be art and projects, which is, I think, an extension of thinking about the template now, thinking of the bulletins and the way in which art and project set up in Amsterdam in the 60s, in the 60s, 70s and 80s, right? Yeah. But this idea of a template, or the idea of the bulletin, and being able to sort of find a way that they worked with the artist that was unique to them, but still had a guide over the entirety of the project, which I find really fascinating, and I think still resonates so much with what quote unquote independent spaces are doing now.
No, and to me, the template, sorry to jump in before you can answer, Eloise, the template it's a strategy of inclusivity, because it is about providing people with clarity about what to expect. If you understand what to expect, the big, strong elements, there's a door, there's a window, there's those things provide a functional space that you can then have more cognitive capacity, physical capacity to be unsured by what's in the exhibition.
Yeah, nice. I have, I guess, two. One is a house, actually. Jason and I have always had the idea that we would love to do a show at the Sonnefeld House.
Oh, beautiful space.
Yeah, so it's not an independent space at all, but to sort of enter into an interior and work with the existing space and the history. So that is a dream that we hope that one day will come about, to curate on a coffee table or something like this. The other one is, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this one, but because we've already sort of worked with them, but Aqua Ebom in Athens. We have only worked with them for a small show, and we've always wished to work on a longer basis, but they have an interesting model of working with artist estates, and actually not just working with them, but also managing them as an artist-run space. So it's also a really interesting relationship that they have. They see a need and they take it upon themselves to kind of... Also, they are working very closely with a quite established artist in Athens and trying to bring them out into other parts of the world. And also their model is very interesting because they started during Documenta, when Documenta was in Athens, through the work of Otterbong Nakanga. And I think the work's called Carved to Flow, and all the soaps that came from that work would then pay for the space. And I don't think that's what the model is now, but I believe that Otterbong Nakanga and Maya Taunta together saw that there was also a need for a space, and it was also really awesome that an artist is able, through their own work, to be able to create this space, and then they're established for enough to be able for her to move on and feed other projects with the funding. And there's many other reasons. They're a very exciting space. And
interesting how their kind of business model and curatorial model sort of have to run in parallel, right, with the sort of Carved to Flow project that sort of then funds and supports the whole thing. Yeah,
also what I sort of like as well is that, like, Maya, who's the director, when another job comes across her path, she's fine with taking it and then letting Aqua Ebom rest for a while. And I've always been worried that if we were to leave Shimmer to rest for a year or whatever, that if we were to come back, we would have lost everything. And what I can see from Aqua Ebom, that is not the case. There is still an energy there and a need. And I think it's really because the community in Athens want the space to be there. So, I think it's very brave to be able to do that. And also, I think perhaps she has to. Anyway, that is my space.
I just think it's so exciting that the resource, like that artists and curators and directors are creative with the resources, that as a materiality, I find that, always very exciting. So,
yeah, and even the temporality of it, that's the space. Oh, well, thank you everyone so much for all your insights. I think we've got a lot of, exciting conversations, this idea of, everything being interdependent, this sort of integrated practices coming together. Thank you so much for joining us in your evening, Ruth, from Aotearoa. And thanks so much, Shimmer, for having us in your wonderful space.
Oh, of course. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
No, thanks so much, Ruth.
Yay.
We're done.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. You can listen to and read more of our original editorial content online at OtherNetwork.io. OtherNetwork is a project initiated by Keays together with IFA, Institut für Auslandsbeziehungen. This series is generously supported by Between Bridges Foundation. It is produced and hosted by Federico Martelli and Colin Keays, with sound design, editing, and production by Jack Bardwell. Original music is by Jack Bardwell. OtherNetwork's research team includes Abraham Tete in Accra, Samantha Mudisinjane in Johannesburg, Camilo Quiroga in Bogotá, Camila Alegría in Santiago de Chile, and Mateus dos Reis in Sao Paulo.